No child should ever have to wonder why their own family doesn't love them. But 8-year-old Serafina asked herself that question every single day. Born with albinism, her pale skin and white hair made her family ashamed. They called her cursed, a ghost child who brought bad luck. One by one, her own relatives turned away, leaving her to believe she was unlovable. Then Warren Hayes walked into her life. He was a widowed mechanic with calloused hands and an empty wallet, barely keeping himself afloat. He had every reason to say no, but when he looked into Serafina's eyes, he saw something nobody else did, a daughter. Against all odds, he chose to give her the one thing she'd never had, a home. What made this broken man become the father a rejected child desperately needed? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Milldale, Pennsylvania was the kind of town where everyone knew your name, your business, and your grandmother's maiden name. Population 3,000, give or take a few souls who passed through, but never stayed. Main Street stretched 4 blocks, lined with brick storefronts that had weathered a century of seasons. The church steeple rose above everything else, a constant reminder that some things were meant to last forever. In autumn, the hills surrounding the valley blazed with color. Crimson maples, golden oaks, and the occasional evergreen standing dark against the riot of warmth. The air smelled of wood smoke and approaching winter, of apple cider from the orchard on the edge of town, and the rich, earthy scent of leaves slowly returning to soil. Serafina moved through this world like a ghost, though not by choice. At 8 years old, she had learned to make herself small, to walk the edges of rooms, to speak only when spoken to, which was rarely. Her grandmother's house sat on Elm Street, a narrow 2-story with peeling white paint and a porch that sagged slightly to the left. Inside, the rooms were dim and smelled of old furniture and loneliness. Photographs lined the hallway walls, generations of family frozen in time, but none of them showed Serafina. Her grandmother had seen to that. "Don't touch anything," her grandmother would say each morning before leaving for her job at the post office. "And stay inside. People don't need to see you wandering around." Serafina would nod, her pale fingers clutching the strap of her school bag. Her hair, white as fresh snow, hung in a braid down her back. Her skin was so fair it seemed almost translucent in certain light, and her eyes, a very pale blue, often made people look away quickly, as if they'd seen something unsettling. She had albinism, a word she'd learned when she was 5, and a doctor had explained it to her grandmother in clinical terms. Reduced melanin production, photosensitivity, nothing dangerous, just different. But different was dangerous in Milldale. Her mother had died giving birth to her, and the family had decided, in their collective grief and confusion, that the baby's unusual appearance was somehow connected to that loss. Her father had never been part of the picture. Her grandmother refused to speak of him, and Serafina had learned not to ask. The extended family had taken one look at the pale, pink-eyed infant, and whispered words like curse and bad omen. Her Aunt Constance, her mother's older sister, had been the cruelest. At a family gathering when Serafina was 4, Constance had said loud enough for everyone to hear, "That child looks like death itself." No wonder her mother died. Serafina still remembered the way the room had gone silent, the way no one had contradicted her aunt. School was no better. Milldale Elementary was small, with barely 200 students across all grades. The other children had learned their parents' prejudices well. They didn't hit her or call her names, not where teachers could hear, but they didn't include her either. At recess, she sat alone on the swings, pushing herself in small arcs, while the other girls played hopscotch and the boys kicked soccer balls across the field. At lunch, she ate by herself at the far end of a table, her sandwich tasting like sawdust, her milk carton sweating in her hands. She coped by creating. In her small bedroom, barely large enough for a twin bed and a dresser, she drew pictures with the stub of pencil she'd found and kept. She drew birds mostly, cardinals and blue jays, sparrows and the occasional hawk she'd seen circling above the hills. She drew them in flight, wings spread, heading somewhere else, somewhere better. She also made small crafts from whatever she could find, acorns arranged in patterns, dandelions woven into chains that wilted by evening, a bracelet braided from thread she'd pulled from an old pillowcase. The bracelet she wore always, a reminder that she could make something beautiful even when the world insisted she was not. On the other side of town, above Hayes Auto Repair, Warren Hayes was living a different kind of isolation. At 38, he had the weathered look of someone who'd seen too much loss too soon. His dark hair was threaded with grey at the temples, and lines creased the corners of his eyes, though these days they came from squinting at engine blocks rather than from laughter. He was tall and lean, with the kind of strength that came from years of physical work. His hands were perpetually stained with grease no amount of scrubbing could completely remove, and he wore flannel shirts with the sleeves rolled up, jeans faded nearly white at the knees. 3 years ago, his world had ended twice in the span of 6 months. First, his wife Judith had died of cancer, a swift, brutal diagnosis that had given them only 8 weeks from the day they'd learned about it to the day she'd taken her last breath in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and despair. Then, before Warren could even begin to process his grief, their 5-year-old son caught what the doctors initially thought was a simple flu. It wasn't. Meningitis. By the time they'd figured it out, it was too late. Little Philip died on a Tuesday morning while Warren held his small hand and begged him to stay. The town had mourned with him. They'd brought casseroles and condolences, filled the funeral home twice, and patted his shoulder with expressions of sympathy that felt as hollow as his chest. Then, as grief does, it became old news. Life moved on for everyone else. For Warren, it simply stopped. He kept the auto repair shop open because he needed something to do with his hands, some problem he could actually solve. Engines made sense. You diagnosed the issue, replaced the broken parts, and things worked again. If only people could be fixed so easily. The apartment above the shop was sparse. A couch, a small kitchen table, a bedroom he barely used since he often fell asleep on the couch, with the television murmuring in the background. Photographs of Judith and Philip sat on the bookshelf, frozen moments of happiness that felt like they'd happened to someone else. The town respected Warren. They brought him their cars, their trucks, their tractors. They paid him fairly and sometimes tried to make conversation, though he rarely said more than necessary. Old Pete, who ran the diner on Main Street, made sure Warren ate at least one real meal a day, often hand-delivering a plate of meatloaf or chicken when Warren forgot to come by. Mrs. Donnelly, the librarian, had known Warren since he was a boy, and sometimes left books she thought he might like on the shop's doorstep. Mysteries mostly, stories where problems got solved and justice prevailed. That poor man, people would say, lost everything. They meant well, but Warren hated the pity. He wasn't poor, he was just empty. It was a Thursday afternoon in late October when Warren first really saw Serafina. He'd noticed her before, of course, hard to miss a child with. That striking appearance in a town this small, but he'd never really looked. That day, he'd stepped out of the shop to carry a bag of trash to the dumpster in the alley and found her there, pressed against the brick wall, trying to make herself invisible. She was crying. Silent tears streaming down her pale cheeks, her small body shaking with the effort of keeping quiet. Warren stopped. He knew grief when he saw it, recognized the particular way someone held themselves together when everything inside was breaking apart. "You all right there?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle. She looked up, startled, her pale eyes wide with something between fear and surprise. She wiped at her face quickly with the back of her hand, smearing tears across her cheek. In her other hand, she clutched a piece of paper, crumpled and torn. "I'm fine," she whispered, the lie obvious. Warren set down the trash bag and crouched so he was at her level, keeping a respectful distance. "Doesn't look like fine from where I'm standing, or crouching, I guess." He offered a small smile. "I'm Warren. I run the shop here." "I know," she said quietly. Then, as if remembering her manners, "I'm Serafina. That's a beautiful name." He nodded toward the paper in her hand. "Bad day at school?" Her lower lip trembled. She looked down at the crumpled permission slip. He could make out the header now, something about a field trip. "My grandmother said no." She said, her voice caught. "She said there's no point wasting money on me." Warren felt something crack in his chest, a fissure in the careful wall he'd built around his heart. He recognized the look in her eyes, the belief that she wasn't worth the trouble, wasn't worth loving. He'd seen that look in the mirror often enough over the past 3 years. "Listen to me," he said, his voice firm but kind. "That's not true, you hear me? That's not true at all." She looked up at him, wanting to believe but afraid to hope. He stood, reached into his back pocket, and pulled out a clean shop rag. "Here, for your face." She took it hesitantly, dabbed at her eyes. "You hungry?" Warren asked. "I was about to grab a sandwich from Pete's. You could join me if you want." Serafina shook her head quickly. "I should go home." "All right. But if you ever need a place to sit and catch your breath, the shop's got a bench out front. You're welcome any time." She looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he meant it. Then she nodded once, clutched the rag in her hand along with the ruined permission slip, and hurried away down the alley. Warren watched her go, that crack in his chest widening. He picked up the trash bag and walked to the dumpster, but his mind was elsewhere. That night he barely touched Pete's meatloaf. He kept thinking about pale blue eyes filled with a hurt no child should know, about words that cut deeper than any blade. "No point wasting money on me." He thought about Philip, who'd never doubted for a moment that he was loved. He thought about Judith, who'd been a teacher and had always said that every child deserved to know they mattered. And he thought about Serafina, whose name meant fiery ones or burning ones in some language he couldn't remember, and how ironic it was that a child named for fire should be so utterly alone in the cold. That night he couldn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in his hands, staring at the photographs on the shelf. Judith smiled at him from their wedding day. Philip grinned with chocolate ice cream smeared across his face. What would they think of him now? Living half a life, going through motions, fixing engines because he couldn't fix himself. And what would they think about a little girl who needed someone to tell her she mattered? He didn't have answers, not yet. But for the first time in 3 years, Warren Hayes felt something stir beneath the grief. It wasn't hope exactly. Maybe it was purpose. Maybe it was just recognition. One broken person seeing another and understanding without words that isolation was the cruelest kind of pain. Outside, autumn wind rattled the windows. Leaves tumbled through the empty street. And somewhere across town, Serafina lay awake in her narrow bed, clutching a braided thread bracelet and wondering if the kind man with the sad eyes had really meant what he said, or if it was just another moment of fleeting kindness before the world remembered she wasn't worth the trouble. The notice appeared on the bulletin board at Milldale Elementary on a Monday morning. Bright yellow paper that promised adventure. Annual 5th grade overnight camping trip to Pine Ridge State Park. 3 days, 2 nights. Hiking, campfires, stargazing, and nature study. Permission slips due Friday. Cost $45 per student. Serafina stood before the bulletin board during morning recess, reading the notice 3 times. She'd never been camping. She'd never been anywhere, really, except the 4 blocks between her grandmother's house and the school. The idea of sleeping under stars, of hiking trails through autumn woods, of sitting around a campfire with other children, it felt like something from a book. Something that happened to other people, but never to her. But maybe, just maybe, this time could be different. She carefully removed one of the permission slips from the stack pinned beneath the notice, folded it precisely, and tucked it into her jacket pocket. All day she felt it there, a small rectangle of possibility pressed against her heart. In math class, she calculated, she had $17 saved in a jar under her bed, money from birthdays past that her grandmother gave her out of obligation rather than affection. If she could just convince her grandmother to pay the remaining $28, If she could just explain how important this was. After school, Serafina walked home slower than usual, rehearsing her words. She would be polite. She would be grateful. She would promise to do extra chores, to be quieter, to take up even less space than she already did. Her grandmother was in the kitchen when Serafina arrived, sorting through mail with the radio playing softly in the background. The house smelled of instant coffee and the faint mustiness of old carpets. "Grandmother?" Serafina's voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "What is it?" Her grandmother didn't look up from the stack of envelopes. Serafina pulled out the permission slip, smoothed it carefully on the kitchen table. "There's a camping trip for my class. It's educational. We'd study nature and learn about—" "No." The word was flat, final. "But I have some money saved, and if you could just—" Her grandmother finally looked up, her expression hard. "I said no, Serafina. Do you think money grows on trees? Do you think I have $45 to waste on sending you into the woods to frighten the other children?" The words hit like a slap. Serafina felt her throat tighten. "I wouldn't frighten anyone. I'd stay quiet. Enough." Her grandmother returned to the mail. "The answer is no. Why would I waste money on a cursed child? You'll just bring bad luck to the whole group. Besides, who would want you there anyway?" Serafina stood frozen, the permission slip trembling in her hands. She wanted to argue, to plead, to scream that she wasn't cursed, that she was just different, that she deserved the same chances as everyone else. But the words died in her throat because some part of her, the part that had been told she was unwanted for as long as she could remember, believed her grandmother might be right. She grabbed her backpack and fled. Out the front door, down Elm Street, her vision blurred with tears. She refused to let fall until she was out of sight. She ran without thinking, her feet carrying her toward the only place that had felt even remotely safe recently. The alley behind Hayes Auto Repair. She pressed herself against the brick wall, finally letting the tears come, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. She crumpled the permission slip in her fist, the yellow paper tearing at the creases. Cursed waste of money. Who would want you there anyway? The words echoed in her head, confirming what she'd always feared. She was unlovable, unwanted, a burden that nobody wanted to carry. She didn't hear Warren approach, didn't realize he was there until he spoke. "Hey there." His voice was gentle, concerned. "Serafina, right?" She looked up, mortified to be caught crying again. She tried to wipe her face, but the tears kept coming. Warren stood a few feet away, holding a cardboard box that looked like it contained car parts. He set it down carefully. "Same spot as last time. Must be something about this alley." He pulled a clean rag from his pocket, he seemed to always have one, and offered it to her. "What happened?" She took the rag, pressed it against her face. Through the fabric, muffled, she said, "It doesn't matter. It does if it's got you this upset." He leaned against the wall beside her, not too close, giving her space. "Is it that permission slip again?" She pulled the crumpled, torn paper from her pocket, the evidence of her foolish hope. "My grandmother said no." She said, her voice broke. "She said I'm cursed, that I bring bad luck, that nobody wants me there anyway." Warren was quiet for a moment. Then he crouched down to her level, his expression serious. "Look at me, Serafina," she did reluctantly. "You are not cursed. Do you hear me? You're a kid who deserves to go camping and have fun and be treated with kindness. Your grandmother is wrong, but she's right that I'm different," Serafina whispered. "Everyone thinks so. Different doesn't mean cursed. Different just means different." He gestured to himself. "I'm different too. Lost my family. Spend my days covered in grease, probably talk to carburetors more than people. Does that make me cursed?" Despite everything, Serafina felt the tiniest flicker of a smile. "No, exactly," Warren stood thinking. "What if I talked to your grandmother, offered to pay for the trip and chaperone? Would that help?" Hope flared in Serafina's chest, painful in its intensity. "You would do that?" "I would." He said it simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Why?" The question came out as barely a whisper. Warren looked at her for a long moment. "Because everybody deserves someone in their corner. And right now, it looks like you could use someone in yours. That evening, Warren drove to the address Serafina had given him, a narrow house on Elm Street with paint peeling from the shutters. He knocked, straightened his shirt, and prepared himself for a difficult conversation. The woman who answered was in her mid-60s, grey-haired and stern-faced. Her eyes narrowed when she saw him. "Yes? Ma'am, I'm Warren Hayes. I run the auto repair on Main Street. I'm here about your granddaughter." "What about her?" The suspicion in her voice was sharp. "The camping trip. I'd like to pay for her to go, and I'm volunteering to chaperone, so it won't cost you anything." The grandmother's expression hardened. "Why would you want to do that?" "Because she's a good kid, who deserves a chance to be a kid." "She's told you about herself, then?" "About her condition?" Warren kept his voice level. "She told me her grandmother thinks she's cursed." "I'm here to say that's not true, and I'd like to help." The grandmother's laugh was bitter. "You think you're the first person to take pity on her. You'll change your mind once you see how the other children react. Once you realize what she is." "She's a child," Warren said firmly. "That's what she is." The grandmother started to close the door. "The answer is no. I don't need strangers interfering in family business." "Family!" Warren's voice took on an edge he hadn't intended. "With respect, ma'am, family is supposed to protect each other, not tear each other down." Her eyes flashed. "You know nothing about this family, about what that child cost us." "She didn't cost you anything. She was born." "That's not a crime." The grandmother leaned in, her voice dropping to something cold and final. "My daughter died because of her. And now my sister is coming to visit, and we're going to deal with the Serafina problem once and for all. Stay out of it, Mr. Hayes. You don't want this kind of trouble." She shut the door in his face. Warren stood on the porch for a moment, anger and concern warring in his chest. The Serafina problem, as if a child was something to be solved rather than someone to be loved. He walked back to his truck, his mind racing. Deal with her once and for all. What did that mean? Boarding school? An institution? The thought made his stomach turn. He drove back to the shop, but he couldn't settle. He paced the apartment, made coffee he didn't drink, stared at the photographs of Judith and Philip. What would Judith do? She'd have marched right back to that house and given that woman a piece of her mind. She'd have fought for a child who couldn't fight for herself. What would Philip want him to do? The answer was obvious. Philip had been the kind of kid who befriended everyone, who shared his toys without being asked, who cried when he saw other children being excluded. He'd have wanted his dad to help. Around 9 o'clock, Warren heard a sound outside. He looked out the window and saw a small figure climbing into the bed of his pickup truck, parked in the alley behind the shop. Serafina. She was wrapping herself in the old moving blankets he kept back there, trying to make herself invisible again. Warren grabbed his jacket and went downstairs quietly. He approached the truck slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Serafina!" She sat up, guilt and fear written across her face. "I'm sorry. I heard her on the phone with my aunt. They're sending me away, and I didn't know where else to go." Warren's heart broke completely in that moment. This child, who had been failed by every adult in her life, had chosen to trust him, had sought safety in the bed of his truck because she had nowhere else to turn. He made a decision. It crystallized in his mind with absolute clarity, the first clear thing he'd felt in 3 years. "Come on," he said gently, offering his hand. "Let's get you inside where it's warm." "We need to talk." Serafina took his hand, her small fingers cold against his palm. He helped her down from the truck bed and led her upstairs to the apartment. He made her hot chocolate, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and sat across from her at the kitchen table. "I'm going to help you," he said. "I don't know exactly how yet, but I'm going to figure it out. You're not going to be sent away to people who don't care about you. I promise." Serafina looked at him with those pale blue eyes, searching for truth. "Why do you care?" Warren thought about Judith, about Philip, about the gaping hole their absence had left in his life. He thought about how helping this child wouldn't fill that hole. Nothing would. But maybe, just maybe, it could give the pain some purpose. "Because someone should," he said simply. "And right now, that someone is me." Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, soft and silent, covering Milldale in white. Inside, a broken man and a rejected child sat together in the warm light of a kitchen, neither of them knowing that this moment would change everything. Warren couldn't stop thinking about Serafina. After he'd walked her back to her grandmother's house that night, making her promise to call the shop if anything happened, he'd lain awake until dawn, his mind churning through possibilities. Foster care, guardianship, adoption, words he'd never imagined applying to his life again. The next morning, he was in his shop before sunrise, but his hands moved on autopilot while his thoughts stayed fixed on a little girl who believed she was cursed. He pulled out his phone twice to call social services, then put it away both times. What would he even say? He wasn't family. He barely knew her. But he knew enough. He knew she needed help, and he knew he couldn't turn away. Instead of making calls, he did what he did best. He built something. From a pile of spare parts in the corner of his shop, he selected pieces. A section of copper tubing, some small gears from a disassembled clock, screws and washers, a piece of thin metal sheeting. He worked through the morning, bending and shaping, soldering joints, creating something from nothing. By noon, he held in his grease-stained hands a small mechanical butterfly, its wings made from hammered copper that caught the light, its body assembled from tiny gears that actually turned when you wound a small key he'd fashioned from a bolt. It wasn't perfect. The wings were slightly asymmetric, and the gear mechanism was crude. But it was honest work made with care, and it moved. It transformed, just like he hoped Serafina could. He cleaned it carefully, wrapped it in an old shop cloth, and drove to Milldale Elementary. The secretary at the front desk knew him. Everyone knew everyone, and she smiled when he asked her to deliver the package to Serafina. "Of course, Warren. That's sweet of you." He left before he could second-guess himself. Serafina was in English class when the secretary appeared at the door, whispering something to Mrs. Carson, who nodded and gestured to Serafina. "Someone left something for you at the office." Every head in the classroom turned. Serafina felt her face flush as she stood and walked to the front of the room, acutely aware of the whispers that followed. She'd never received anything at school before, never had a reason for anyone to seek her out. The secretary handed her the cloth-wrapped bundle with a kind smile. "From Mr. Hayes at the auto shop." Serafina carried it back to her desk as if it might break, her heart hammering. She carefully unwound the cloth, and there it was, a butterfly made of metal and magic. Its copper wings gleamed. When she touched the small key, the gears turned and the wings moved in a slow, deliberate flutter. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever owned. She looked up to find Timothy, the boy who sat 2 rows over, leaning forward to see. "That's really cool," he said, his voice filled with genuine wonder. "What is it?" "A butterfly," Serafina whispered, still hardly believing it was real. "A mechanical butterfly. Did you make it?" "No, a friend did." The word felt strange in her mouth. Friend? Did she have a friend? Was that what Warren was? She clutched the butterfly carefully, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she smiled at school, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. After school, instead of going straight home, Serafina walked to Hayes Auto Repair. The bell above the door chimed when she entered. Warren emerged from beneath a car on a rolling dolly, wiping his hands on a rag. "Serafina," he stood, and she noticed something in his expression. Surprise, pleasure, maybe a touch of nervousness. "Did you get the package?" She held up the butterfly, cradled in both hands like something precious. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "Thank you." Warren felt something warm unfold in his chest. "I'm glad you like it. I thought maybe you could use something that transforms. Butterflies start out as something completely different, you know. They change into something that can fly." Serafina looked at the butterfly, then at Warren. She understood what he wasn't saying, what he was trying to tell her. The change was possible. That transformation wasn't just for insects. "Mr. Hayes." Her voice was small but steady. "You can call me Warren. Warren, could I—" She hesitated, then pushed forward. "Could I help you here sometimes? In the shop? I could sweep or organize tools, or—" Warren's first instinct was to say no. Liability issues, safety concerns, the fact that she was 8 years old. But then he saw the hope in her eyes, the desperate need to belong somewhere, to be useful to someone. He thought about all the Saturdays he'd spent alone, and about how Philip used to love handing him tools, learning the names of parts. "Saturday mornings," he said, 9 to noon. "You can be my assistant, but only if your grandmother agrees." "She won't care," Serafina said, and the matter-of-fact sadness in her voice made Warren's jaw tighten. That Saturday, Serafina arrived at 8:45, early and eager. Warren set her up with simple tasks, sorting nuts and bolts, organizing the tool bench, sweeping the floor. But he also taught her, showed her how to identify different wrenches, explained what a carburetor did, let her watch as he diagnosed why Mrs. Fletcher's sedan was making that knocking sound. She absorbed everything like a sponge. Asked intelligent questions, remembered what he taught her. Warren realized with something like wonder that she was genuinely curious, genuinely bright. She just never had anyone take the time to notice. They fell into a rhythm. Warren would explain what he was doing, and Serafina would hand him tools, sometimes correctly guessing which one he'd need next. During breaks, they'd sit on the bench out front drinking lemonade, watching Milldale's minimal traffic roll by. "Why did you lose your family?" she asked one Saturday, then immediately looked stricken. "I'm sorry. That was rude." "It's all right," Warren took a breath. "My wife got sick. Cancer. It happened very fast. And then my son," his voice caught. "He caught an infection. We couldn't save him." Serafina was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My mother died when I was born. My family blames me for it. That's not your fault. You understand that, right? Birth it's complicated. Sometimes things go wrong and it's nobody's fault. It's just," he struggled for words, "it's just terrible luck. Not a curse. Do you think your wife and son would be mad that you're helping me?" Warren looked at this small, pale child who'd been carrying impossible weight for far too long. "No," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I think they'd be proud. I think," he paused, then continued, "I think maybe they'd be glad I'm finally doing something good again." The weeks passed, and their routine became something both of them needed. Warren taught her about engines and responsibility and patience. Serafina taught Warren, without meaning to, that his heart still worked, that he could still care, that grief didn't have to be the only thing he felt. But Milldale was a small town, and people noticed. They noticed Warren Hayes, who hadn't spoken more than 10 words to anyone in 3 years, suddenly animated while explaining mechanical concepts to the strange albino girl. They noticed Serafina, who'd always been alone, now had somewhere to go on Saturdays, someone who looked at her like she mattered. At the diner, old Pete defended Warren when people questioned his judgment. "Man's doing a kindness. We should all be so decent, but not everyone agreed." Marion Fisher, who taught Sunday school, whispered to her friends that it was inappropriate. A grown man spending time with a child, not his own. Others worried that Warren was trying to replace his lost son, that he was setting himself up for more heartbreak. Some thought he was wasting his time on a child that nobody wanted. Warren heard the whispers, felt the weight of judgment. But when he looked at Serafina, at the way her eyes lit up when she learned something new, at the way she'd stopped flinching when he spoke to her, he knew he couldn't stop. It wouldn't stop. 3 weeks into their Saturday routine, Serafina arrived at the shop looking nervous. "My grandmother said my Aunt Constance is coming next week. She's coming to take me somewhere." Warren set down the wrench he'd been holding. "Take you where?" "I don't know, but I heard them on the phone. Aunt Constance said I needed proper structure and that I couldn't keep living like this." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm scared." Warren crouched in front of her, meeting her eyes. "Listen to me, Serafina. I'm not going to let anyone take you somewhere you don't want to go. Do you trust me?" She nodded, tears threatening. "Then trust me when I say I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to make sure you're safe." That afternoon, after Serafina left, Warren made the call he'd been putting off. Social services. He spoke with a woman named Angela Pritchard, explained the situation as carefully as he could. She listened, asked questions, told him the truth. It would be complicated. The grandmother had legal custody. Family connections would be considered first. But if he wanted to pursue guardianship or foster care, They could start an evaluation. I want to pursue it, Warren said, his voice steady. Whatever it takes. Angela was quiet for a moment. Mr. Hayes, I have to ask, are you sure about this? These processes are lengthy, expensive, and emotionally difficult. And you've suffered significant losses recently. I need to know this is about the child, not about filling a void. Warren looked at the photograph of Philip on his shelf, at Judith's smile frozen in time. I know I can't replace them. I'm not trying to. But this little girl needs help, and I'm in a position to give it. That's enough reason, isn't it? Yes, Angela said softly. Yes, it is. I'll start the paperwork. That night, Warren sat at his kitchen table with coffee growing cold in front of him, staring at forms and requirements, realizing the magnitude of what he'd begun. Home evaluation, background checks, financial assessment, character references. A custody battle with family members who had legal standing. It was overwhelming. It was terrifying. But when he thought of Serafina's smile when she'd received the mechanical butterfly, when he remembered her asking if she could help in the shop, when he pictured her scared and alone while adults decided her fate without considering what she wanted, the choice was clear. He picked up his pen and began filling out forms, the first real step toward fighting for someone who couldn't fight for herself. Outside, October turned to November. The trees stood bare against grey skies, and in a house on Elm Street, Serafina lay awake, clutching a mechanical butterfly and hoping that maybe, just maybe, the kind man at the auto shop really meant what he'd promised. Angela Pritchard arrived at Hayes Auto Repair on a Tuesday afternoon, carrying a leather folder and wearing the expression of someone who'd seen too many difficult situations. She was in her early 50s, with kind eyes behind practical glasses and the sort of calm demeanor that came from years of working with families in crisis. Warren wiped his hands on a rag and led her upstairs to the apartment. She looked around carefully, making notes. The space was clean but sparse. A couch with a faded Afghan thrown over the back. A small kitchen with dishes neatly stacked. A bedroom that Warren clearly used as little more than storage. Photographs of his late wife and son on the shelf, dust-free and carefully arranged. Tell me why you want to do this, Angela said, settling onto the couch, while Warren took the chair across from her. He'd been preparing for this question, but now that it came, the rehearsed answers felt hollow. He spoke from the heart instead. Because she needs someone, and I can be that someone. Because I know what it's like to be broken, and I can't watch a child break without trying to stop it. You've experienced significant loss, Angela said gently. Your wife, your son. Have you processed that grief? I don't think you ever fully process that kind of loss. You just learn to carry it. Warren met her eyes. But helping Serafina, it's not about replacing what I lost. It's about using what I learned from it. My wife was a teacher. She believed every child deserved someone fighting for them. This is me finally living up to that. Angela made notes. The grandmother has legal custody. Family members will have priority in any proceeding. You understand that? I understand. But I also understand that having priority doesn't mean they're right for her. I'll need to evaluate Serafina's current living situation. Interview her, see her home environment. This is going to be invasive for everyone involved. Angela paused. And Mr. Hayes, if we move forward with this, it will become public. This town will have opinions. They already do. Warren's voice was dry. I'm prepared for that. Over the next week, Angela conducted her investigation with quiet efficiency. She visited Serafina's grandmother's house, noting the sparse bedroom, the lack of any personal touches, the photographs that excluded the child who lived there. She interviewed Serafina's teachers, who spoke of a bright but isolated student. She arranged for a medical examination that revealed a child who was underweight, had untreated vision problems from her photosensitivity, and showed signs of chronic stress. She interviewed Serafina herself in a quiet room at the school. Tell me about living with your grandmother. Serafina chose her words carefully. She gives me a place to stay. She makes sure I have clothes and food. But does she make you feel loved? The question hung in the air. Serafina looked down at her hands, at the braided thread bracelet on her wrist. I don't think she knows how to love someone like me. Someone like you. Someone who looks wrong. Angela's heart ached, but she kept her expression neutral. And Mr. Hayes, how does he make you feel? For the first time, Serafina's face brightened. Like I'm not wrong. Like I'm just me, and that's enough. The investigation proceeded, but so did the opposition. Aunt Constance arrived in Milldale a week early, driving a sleek black sedan that looked out of place on Main Street. She was 52, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, her dark hair pulled back severely. She carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted. She went directly to her sister's house, where she and the grandmother held a meeting that Serafina was not invited to attend. Serafina sat on the stairs, listening through the heating vent. "The situation has gotten out of hand," Constance said, her voice sharp. "This mechanic thinks he can just take her. We need to end this quickly. What do you suggest?" The grandmother sounded tired. "Boarding school. There's an excellent institution upstate that specializes in—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Difficult cases. They'll provide structure, education, and keep her away from people who might be uncomfortable. And if I refuse, then I'll petition for custody myself. She can come to Philadelphia, work in my household, earn her keep. Either way, she's not staying here to be a burden, and she's certainly not going to that man." Serafina's blood ran cold. She'd heard enough. That night, she packed a small bag with her few possessions. Some clothes, her drawings, the mechanical butterfly wrapped carefully in a sock. She waited until her grandmother was asleep, then slipped out the back door. The walk to Hayes Auto Repair was dark and cold. November wind cut through her thin jacket. But she knew the way, and she knew where she'd be safe. When she reached the shop, she climbed quietly into the bed of Warren's pickup truck, pulled the old moving blankets around herself, and tried not to cry. Warren found her at dawn. He'd come down to move the truck and nearly had a heart attack when he saw the small bundle of blankets move. Serafina! He was beside the truck in seconds. "What are you doing here?" She sat up, her face pale and frightened. "I heard them. My aunt wants to send me away, to a boarding school or to work in her house. Warren, please, I can't go there." "I can't." Warren lifted her out of the truck bed, her small body shaking with cold and fear. He carried her upstairs, wrapped her in a warm blanket, made hot chocolate he insisted she drink. When she was finally calm enough to speak coherently, she told him everything she'd overheard. Warren listened, his jaw tightening with each word. When she finished, he knelt in front of her chair. "Look at me, Serafina. I made you a promise, and I'm keeping it. You are not going to boarding school. You are not going to work in anyone's household. I'm going to fight for you, and I'm going to win. But she's family, and I'm someone who cares about you. That counts for something." He stood, his decision made. "I'm calling Angela. We're accelerating this process. And first thing tomorrow, I'm confronting your grandmother and your aunt." The next morning, Warren appeared at the grandmother's door with Serafina beside him, her hand firmly in his. The grandmother opened the door, surprise flickering across her face. "Mr. Hayes, what are you doing here with her? She came to me last night." "She's terrified, and with good reason." Warren's voice was controlled but firm. "I'm here to tell you that I'm filing for custody. Social Services is already investigating. And I'm not backing down." Constance appeared behind the grandmother, her expression icy. "On what grounds?" "You're a stranger with no legal standing. On the grounds that this child is being neglected and that her family wants to ship her off to get rid of her rather than care for her." "Neglected?" Constance's laugh was sharp. "She has a roof over her head, food, clothing. That's more than many children have. She has material needs met. She doesn't have love. She doesn't have anyone telling her she matters." Warren kept his hand on Serafina's shoulder. "I'm pursuing legal custody, and I'm not the only one who thinks this is right. There are people in this community who are ready to support this. A broke mechanic against family with resources and legal rights?" Constance's smile was predatory. "You'll lose, Mr. Hayes. You'll waste your money and your time, and in the end, Serafina will still be our responsibility." "Maybe," Warren said. "But I'll fight anyway, because that's what you do for people you care about," Constance studied him for a long moment, then turned to her sister. "Get our lawyer on the phone. If Mr. Hayes wants a legal battle, we'll give him one." Warren led Serafina back to his truck. She was shaking, but not from cold this time. From fear, yes, but also from something else. Hope. Someone was fighting for her. Someone thought she was worth the battle. "What happens now?" she asked as Warren started the engine. "Now we prepare. Angela's going to help us, and we're going to show the court that you deserve better than what you've had." Over the next days, lines were drawn. Angela filed the initial paperwork for Warren's petition for foster care and eventual custody. Constance hired a lawyer, a sharp-dressed man from Pittsburgh who specialized in family law. The grandmother signed paperwork giving Constance power of attorney to act on her behalf in legal matters concerning Serafina. The town began to take sides. Mrs. Donnelly, the librarian, started quietly speaking to people she knew, gathering support. Old Pete made it known at the diner that he stood behind Warren. Timothy's mother, Sharon, told her friends that her son had come home talking about how kind and smart Serafina was, how she'd helped him with a math problem. But others sided with Constance. Blood was blood, they said. Family had rights. Who was Warren Hayes to think he could just take someone else's child? Some remembered his depression after his family died, wondered if he was stable enough to raise another child. The gossip swirled through Milldale like autumn leaves in the wind. And in the middle of it all, Serafina tried to keep going to school, tried to keep pretending everything was normal, while her entire world hung in the balance. One evening, as she helped Warren organize his tool bench, she asked, "What if they say no? What if the court says I have to go with my aunt?" Warren stopped what he was doing and faced her fully. "Then I'll appeal, and if that doesn't work, I'll find another way. But Serafina, I need you to know something. No matter what happens legally, you are not alone anymore. You have people who care about you. That doesn't go away just because a judge makes a ruling." She nodded, wanting to believe him, trying to trust that for once. Someone would fight for her and win. Angela arrived at the shop later that week with news. "We have a hearing date. 6 weeks from now, the judge will hear arguments from all parties and make a preliminary determination." She looked at Warren seriously. "I have to tell you, Mr. Hayes, this is going to be difficult. Constance has resources. She has family connection. I have the fact that I actually care about her," Warren interrupted. "That has to count for something." "It does," Angela said softly. "But in family court, it doesn't always count for enough. We need to build the strongest case possible. Character witnesses, financial stability, a proper home environment." She glanced around the sparse apartment. "You're going to need to show you can provide for a child." Warren looked at his meager savings, his modest apartment, his grease-stained hands. Then he looked at Serafina, who was watching him with trust in her pale blue eyes. "Then that's what I'll show them," he said. "Whatever it takes." The evaluation process felt invasive, like being slowly dissected under a microscope. Angela came to the apartment multiple times, measuring rooms, noting furniture, asking questions about Warren's finances that made him acutely aware of how little he had. His mechanic's salary was steady but modest. His savings, never substantial, had dwindled from the years of grief, where he'd barely cared about money at all. "You'll need a proper bedroom for her," Angela said gently, standing in the doorway of what was currently Warren's storage room. Boxes of Judith's and Philip's belongings were stacked against the walls, things he hadn't been able to look at, let alone sort through. "And the court will want to see financial planning. How you'll cover clothing, food, medical expenses, education." Warren nodded, feeling the weight of it. "I'll figure it out. I know you will." Angela's expression softened. "But Mr. Hayes, I need to prepare you. Constance is building a case that focuses on your emotional state. She's already requested your medical records from after your family died." Warren's jaw tightened. "That was 3 years ago. Depression doesn't have an expiration date in family court. They'll argue that you're not psychologically stable, that you're trying to replace your lost son. That's not what this is. I know, but we need to prove it. Have you considered speaking with a counselor? Getting a current psychological evaluation that shows you're in a healthy place?" The idea made Warren uncomfortable. He'd done the required grief counseling after Judith and Philip died, sat in offices with well-meaning therapists who'd used words like processing and closure, as if grief were a problem you could solve. He'd stopped going after 6 months because talking about it hadn't made it hurt less. And the silence of his empty apartment had been easier to bear than the weight of speaking his pain aloud. But if it helped Serafina, he'd do it. I'll make an appointment, he said. Meanwhile, Serafina's life at school was changing in small, unexpected ways. Timothy had become genuinely friendly, sitting with her at lunch sometimes, asking about the mechanical butterfly she kept carefully in her desk. His mother, Sharon, had started a quiet campaign of her own, speaking to other parents about how kind and intelligent Serafina was. My Timothy says she's the smartest girl in their class, Sharon told Marion Fisher after church one Sunday. Helped him understand fractions when he was struggling. Sweet as can be, the shift was subtle but real. A few other children started including Serafina in playground games. Mrs. Carson, her teacher, began calling on her more often, showcasing her thoughtful answers. It was as if Warren's belief in her worth had given others permission to see it too, but not everyone was convinced. Constance was building her case with ruthless efficiency. She hired investigators who dug into Warren's background, looking for anything that might paint him as unfit. They found his medical records, prescriptions for antidepressants, documentation of grief counseling, a note from a doctor 3 years ago suggesting he consider inpatient treatment for severe depression, which Warren had declined. She also worked on public opinion. Over coffee with the grandmother's friends, she painted a picture of a well-meaning but misguided man trying to heal his own wounds by taking someone else's child. She emphasized her own success, her financial stability, her position in Philadelphia's business community. I'm not saying Mr. Hayes is a bad man, she'd say, her voice dripping with false sympathy. I'm saying he's a broken man who needs help himself, not the responsibility of a difficult child. The words filtered through Milldale's gossip networks, and Warren felt the town's opinion shift like sand beneath his feet. People who'd been supportive grew hesitant. Even old Pete, his staunchest defender, worried aloud. I'm behind you, Warren, Pete said one evening at the diner, sliding a plate of meatloaf across the counter. But I'm hearing things. People saying maybe you're not thinking straight, that you're acting out of grief rather than sense. Warren pushed the food around his plate. Maybe I am. Does that make it wrong? No, Pete said firmly, but it makes it harder to defend. The turning point came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Donnelly, the librarian who'd known Warren since he was a boy, decided that quiet support wasn't enough. She typed up a simple statement, explaining why she believed Warren was the right choice for Serafina. Printed 50 copies and left them at strategic locations around town. The diner, the post office, the church bulletin board, the grocery store. The document was straightforward and powerful. It described Warren's character, his kindness, his steadiness, even through grief. It described Serafina's transformation from an isolated, frightened child to one who was beginning to bloom. And it ended with a simple request. If you believe that love matters more than blood, if you believe this child deserves someone who truly wants her, please sign below and return to Milldale Library. It was a petition, handcrafted and earnest. Sharon was the first to sign, adding a note. My son has learned compassion from watching Mr. Hayes's kindness. Then came others. Pete signed, Mrs. Carson signed, the owner of the hardware store signed. Even some who'd been skeptical found themselves moved by Mrs. Donnelly's simple, honest words. Within a week, the petition had 43 signatures. Within 2 weeks, 78. People Warren barely knew added their names. People who'd seen him at his lowest and believed he'd come through it. People who'd watched Serafina change from a scared, silent child into one who smiled, who raised her hand in class, who was learning to believe she had value. Constance discovered the petition during a visit to the post office and was furious. She confronted Mrs. Donnelly at the library. "You're interfering in a family matter," Constance said. Her voice icy, Mrs. Donnelly, 72 years old and unimpressed by intimidation, simply looked at her over her reading glasses. "I'm supporting a member of my community who's trying to do right by a child. There's a difference. You don't understand the complexities here. That child requires special care, special understanding. What she requires," Mrs. Donnelly interrupted, "is love. Something you've shown no evidence of providing." Constance left the library, seething. She returned to her lawyer with new instructions. Be more aggressive. Find more evidence. Threaten legal action against anyone who continued supporting Warren's petition. Some signatures were quietly withdrawn. People who'd signed now worried about being dragged into a legal battle. But the core group held firm. Mrs. Donnelly refused to be intimidated. Pete told Constance's lawyer to his face that he'd testify in court if needed. Sharon organized other parents to write letters of support. The community was fracturing, taking sides in a battle that felt bigger than one child's custody. It became about values, about what mattered more: traditional family structures or the radical act of choosing to love someone who wasn't yours. Warren tried to stay focused on practical matters. He took extra work, fixing tractors and farm equipment on evenings and weekends, saving every dollar he could. He cleaned out the storage room, finally facing the boxes of his family's belongings. It was agonizing work, holding Judith's favorite sweater, finding Philip's toy cars, but he pushed through because Serafina needed a real bedroom. He painted the walls a soft lavender. Serafina had mentioned once that she liked purple. He bought a proper bed frame from the second-hand store, a desk for homework, a bookshelf. He hung simple curtains that would block the light, remembering her photosensitivity. When Serafina saw it, she burst into tears. "No one's ever made me a room before," she whispered. Warren knelt beside her. "Well, everyone should have a space that's theirs, a place where they feel safe." She threw her arms around his neck, and Warren held her carefully, feeling the weight of responsibility and privilege all at once. This child trusted him, believed in him. He couldn't let her down. The psychological evaluation Angela had recommended was scheduled. Warren sat in Dr. Helen Russo's office, a pleasant room with warm lighting and comfortable chairs, and answered questions about his grief, his current state of mind, his motivations for wanting custody of Serafina. "Are you trying to replace your son?" Dr. Russo asked, her tone clinical but not unkind. Warren had thought about this question countless times. "No," he said finally. Philip was irreplaceable. "I'm not trying to get him back. I'm trying to give a child what Philip had, a home where she's wanted. If anything, I'm honoring his memory by doing this, not replacing him." "And your depression? How would you characterize your mental health now?" "Better," Warren said honestly. "Not perfect. I still have hard days. But helping Serafina has given me purpose again. It's reminded me that life can still matter, that I can still matter to someone." Dr. Russo made notes. "Some might say that's an unhealthy dependency, basing your well-being on another person's need for you." "Maybe," Warren acknowledged. "But isn't that what parenting is? Being needed and rising to meet that need? My wife used to say that loving someone, really loving them, meant choosing every day to show up for them. That's what I'm doing! I'm showing up." The evaluation took 2 hours. Dr. Russo was thorough, asking about his coping mechanisms, his support system, his plans for handling the stress of single parenthood. When it was over, she told him she'd send her report to Angela within the week. Warren left feeling exposed, but hopeful. He'd been honest. He'd shown that he understood his own struggles and was actively working through them. Surely that counted for something. 4 weeks before the hearing, Constance made her boldest move yet. She filed a motion with the court requesting immediate temporary custody, arguing that Serafina was in an unstable situation and should be removed from her grandmother's home and placed with family, namely Constance herself, until the hearing could be held. Angela called Warren as soon as she heard. "They're trying to take her now, before you have a chance to make your case. There's an emergency hearing in 3 days. Warren felt his world tilt. "Can they do that?" "They can try. We need to be ready to argue that removing her from her current school, her current support system, would cause more harm than good. The petition signatures will help. So will Dr. Russo's evaluation, if it comes back favorably. 3 days. Warren had 3 days to prepare for the first real battle in this war. He looked across the shop to where Serafina was carefully organizing wrenches by size, humming softly to herself, finally comfortable enough in his presence to make small sounds of contentment. He couldn't lose her. Not now, not when she was finally starting to believe she deserved to be loved. "We'll be ready," he told Angela, and he meant it. The emergency hearing was held in a small county courtroom that smelled of old wood and legal documents. Judge Patricia Brennan presided, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd heard every excuse and seen every variety of human behavior. Warren sat with Angela at one table, Constance and her lawyer at another. The grandmother was conspicuously absent, having signed over all legal decisions to her sister. Constance's lawyer, a man named Richard Sutherland, made his case with polished efficiency. "Your Honor, we're seeking temporary custody simply to provide stability for this child while the court makes its determination. Her current living situation is uncertain at best. Her grandmother is elderly and has admitted she cannot properly care for a child with special needs. Mr. Hayes, while well-intentioned, has no legal standing and an unstable psychological history." He presented Warren's medical records, the documentation of his depression, the antidepressant prescriptions. He painted a picture of a man so damaged by loss that he was grasping at anything to fill the void. "My client offers a stable home, financial security, and most importantly, family connection." "Blood matters, Your Honor. This child belongs with family." Angela stood to respond, and Warren was grateful for her calm presence. "Your Honor, what Mr. Sutherland calls instability, we call healing. Mr. Hayes has been through tragedy, yes, but he's come through it. Dr. Russo's evaluation, submitted to the court yesterday, shows a man who is psychologically healthy, self-aware, and genuinely motivated by the child's welfare." She presented the petition, 78 signatures from community members. "This community believes in Mr. Hayes. They've watched him care for this child, watched her transform from isolated and frightened to engaged and hopeful. Removing her now would be traumatic." Judge Brennan reviewed the documents in silence. Finally, she looked up. "I'm not making a final determination today, but I am denying the motion for immediate temporary custody. The child will remain in her current living situation until the full hearing." She fixed Constance with a stern look. "Ms. Constance, the court appreciates family connection, but it also recognizes that disrupting a child's life unnecessarily is harmful. If you want custody, you'll make your case at the scheduled hearing." It was a small victory, but Warren felt the relief flood through him like water. Serafina wouldn't be taken. Not yet. Outside the courthouse, Constance approached him, her expression cold. "You think you've won something? This is just a delay. In the end, blood wins. It always does." Warren met her gaze steadily. "Then you don't understand what family really means." She turned and walked away, heels clicking on the concrete. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of normal and surreal. Warren and Serafina maintained their Saturday routine, but now it carried extra weight. Every moment felt precious, borrowed against an uncertain future. They worked on cars, ate lunch on the bench out front, and talked about everything and nothing. One Saturday, Serafina asked about Warren's son. "What was he like?" Warren had been expecting this question, but still had to take a moment. "He was bright, curious like you. He loved building things with blocks, and he'd get this look of intense concentration, his tongue sticking out a little." Warren smiled at the memory. "He was kind, too. Once he gave his favorite toy car to another kid at the park because that kid was crying. Broke my heart and made me proud at the same time." "Do you think he'd be mad that you're helping me?" "No." Warren's voice was firm. "I think he'd like you. I think he'd be glad I finally stopped sitting alone, feeling sorry for myself." Serafina was quiet for a moment. "I think about my mother sometimes. I never knew her, but I wonder if she'd be ashamed of me." "Why would she be ashamed?" "Because of how I look. Because I killed her." Warren set down his tools and turned to face her completely. "Serafina, listen to me very carefully. You did not kill your mother. Birth is complicated. Sometimes things go wrong, and it's nobody's fault. It's just terrible random chance. Your mother would not blame you. She'd want you to be happy and loved and safe. I guarantee it." Tears slipped down Serafina's pale cheeks. "How do you know?" "Because that's what parents want for their children always, even when they're not here anymore." Warren pulled her into a hug, let her cry against his shoulder. "Your mother would be proud of you, of how brave you are, how smart, how kind despite everything you've been through." That night, Warren sat at his kitchen table with a box he'd been avoiding. Letters. He'd started writing them after Judith and Philip died. Letters he'd never sent because there was nowhere to send them. Letters where he poured out his grief, his anger, his desperate loneliness. He'd filled a notebook over the past 3 years, words addressed to people who couldn't read them. He opened the box and read through some of them now. "Dear Judith, I don't know how to do this without you. Dear Philip, I miss your laugh more than I knew I could miss anything." The words felt raw, painful, but also necessary. He'd needed to write them, needed to speak to the silence. But reading them now, he realized something. The most recent entries had changed. They were less about drowning in grief and more about moving through it. The last letter, written a month ago, mentioned Serafina. "Dear Judith, I met a little girl who needs help. I think I'm going to try to help her. I hope that's all right." Warren picked up his pen and wrote one more letter. "Dear Judith and Philip, I'm fighting for something again. For someone. A little girl named Serafina, who reminds me that the world still has good in it worth protecting. I'm scared I'll fail her, scared I'm not enough. But I'm going to try anyway, because you both taught me that trying matters. I miss you both every day. That hasn't changed and never will. But I'm learning that missing you and still living a life worth living aren't opposites. They're both true at the same time. I hope you'd be proud of what I'm doing. I hope you'd understand. I love you both, always." Warren, he closed the notebook and set it back in the box. Then he called Dr. Russo and scheduled another appointment. Not because Angela required it, but because he realized he needed it. Needed to talk through his grief with someone who could help him carry it more healthily. Meanwhile, Angela discovered something that would change everything. She was reviewing Serafina's birth records for the custody case when she noticed a discrepancy. The birth certificate listed the father as unknown, standard for cases where the father wasn't present or identified. But the original hospital intake form, the one filled out when Serafina's mother was admitted in labor, listed a name, Christopher Dane. Angela made some calls. Found a Christopher Dane who'd lived in Milldale 8 years ago. He'd moved to Oregon, had a history of drug addiction in his 20s, but recent records showed him 5 years sober, employed in construction, living a stable life. She called Warren to tell him what she'd found. There's a biological father. He may not even know Serafina exists. Warren felt something cold settle in his stomach. What does that mean for the case? It means it gets more complicated. If he's alive and can prove paternity, he has legal rights that supersede both you and Constance. Father's rights are taken very seriously. Should we try to find him? Angela was quiet for a moment. Legally, I'm obligated to investigate. The court will want to know. But Warren, I need you to prepare yourself. If this man wants his daughter and can prove he's fit, he'll have the strongest claim of anyone. After Angela hung up, Warren sat in silence. He'd been prepared to fight Constance, prepared to battle the grandmother's indifference. But a biological father who might not even know his daughter existed. That was different. That was a complication that could end everything before it really began. He didn't tell Serafina. Not yet. There was no point in worrying her until they knew more. But that night, watching her do homework at the kitchen table, he felt the fragility of their situation more acutely than ever. Every moment was borrowed. Every smile was temporary. Every victory was conditional. Angela worked quickly and quietly, tracking down Christopher Dane through employment records and social media. She found him in Portland, Oregon, working for a construction company, living in a modest apartment. His social media showed a man who'd turned his life around. Photos of job sites, hiking trips, posts about sobriety milestones. She debated whether to contact him directly or wait for the court to handle it. The decision was taken out of her hands when she discovered that Christopher had already hired a private investigator 3 weeks ago. He'd been searching for information about a woman named Caroline, Serafina's mother, and had just learned the truth. Caroline hadn't miscarried as her family had told him. She'd had the baby and died in childbirth. And that baby was alive, living in Milldale with a grandmother who'd hidden her existence. Angela's phone rang. It was an attorney from Portland, representing Christopher Dane. "My client has just learned he has a daughter he never knew about. He's requesting DNA testing and filing for custody." Angela closed her eyes. "When?" "He's on a plane right now. He'll be in Pennsylvania tomorrow." When Angela told Warren, he felt his world shift beneath his feet. "Tomorrow?" "He has rights, Warren. Strong ones. As the biological father, if he can prove paternity and show he's fit." "I know." Warren's voice was hollow. "I know what it means." That evening he called Serafina down from her room. She came downstairs with her mechanical butterfly in her hand, the wings catching the light. She'd been treasuring it, winding the key and watching it move whenever she felt scared. "We need to talk," Warren said gently. She sat across from him, her pale eyes wide with concern. "Is it about the hearing?" "Sort of." Warren took a breath. "Angela found something. Your father, your biological father, he's alive, and he didn't know you existed until now. He's coming here." Serafina stared at him. "My father?" "The family told him your mother had miscarried. They hid you from him. But he found out the truth, and now he wants to meet you. Does that mean—" her voice trembled. "Does that mean you can't keep me?" Warren wanted to promise her everything would be fine, that nothing would change. But he couldn't lie to her. "I don't know. He has legal rights, strong ones. But no matter what happens, I'm not giving up. You understand that? Whatever happens, I'm fighting for you," she nodded, but tears were falling now. "I don't want to leave. I don't want to go with someone I don't know." Warren pulled her into his arms. "I know, sweetheart. I know." They stayed like that for a long time, holding on to each other while the future became uncertain all over again. Outside, November gave way to December. The first snow began to fall, blanketing Milldale in white. And somewhere in the sky between Oregon and Pennsylvania, a man who'd lost years to addiction and grief was flying toward the daughter he'd never known he had. Ready to claim what he believed was rightfully his, Christopher Dane arrived in Milldale on a grey December morning, driving a rental car through streets he hadn't seen in nearly 9 years. He was 34, tall and lean with the weathered look of someone who worked outdoors. His dark hair was cut short, and his hands bore the calluses of construction work. He wore clean jeans and a flannel shirt, and his eyes, the same pale blue as Serafina's, held a mixture of determination and barely contained grief. He went directly to Angela's office, as arranged. She met him with professional courtesy, but also caution. She'd seen too many absent parents suddenly appear when it was convenient, and she needed to determine whether this man was genuine or opportunistic. "Tell me what happened," she said, once they were seated in her office. "How did you not know you had a daughter?" Christopher's hands tightened on his knees. "I was 25 when I met Caroline. I was a mess back then. Pills mostly. Started with a work injury, became an addiction. I loved Caroline, or I thought I did, but I was barely functional." He took a breath. "When she told me she was pregnant, I wanted to step up. I swear I did. But her family, they saw what I was. They told her I'd destroy her life, destroy the baby's life. They were probably right. What happened then? Caroline's mother and sister, they arranged for her to go stay with relatives upstate until the baby was born. They told me she'd miscarried, showed me what looked like medical papers, though I realize now they must have been fake. I was so far gone in my addiction I believed them." His voice cracked. "I believed them, and I was almost relieved." "How sick is that?" "I was relieved because I knew I couldn't be a father, not like that. And later, I got clean. 5 years ago, I've been sober since then, rebuilt my life, got a decent job. But I never stopped thinking about Caroline, about what we lost. 3 weeks ago, I hired a private investigator to find her. I wanted to, I don't know, apologize, make amends, something. He looked at Angela directly. That's when I learned the truth. She died giving birth. The baby lived. And her family had been hiding my daughter from me for 8 years. Angela studied him carefully. Why come forward now? You could have stayed in Oregon. Let someone else handle this. Because she's my daughter, Christopher said simply. Because I spent 8 years thinking she was dead when she was alive. Because I owe it to Caroline to be the father I couldn't be then. He pulled out his phone, showed Angela photos, his apartment, his workplace, letters of recommendation from his employer and his AA sponsor. I'm not that person anymore. I can provide for her. I want to provide for her. Angela made notes. You understand there's already a custody case in progress? Mr. Hayes has filed for guardianship, and the child's aunt is also seeking custody, I heard. But I'm her father. That has to count for something. It counts for a lot, Angela admitted. Possibly everything. But Mr. Hayes has been caring for Serafina for months. She trusts him. Removing her from that relationship could be traumatic. Christopher's expression tightened. And keeping her from her real father isn't traumatic. That depends on what kind of father you'll be. We'll need DNA testing to confirm paternity, background checks, home evaluation. I'll do whatever you need. Just let me meet her, please. The meeting was arranged for that afternoon at Angela's office, neutral territory. Warren brought Serafina, who was silent and tense during the drive. She held the mechanical butterfly in one hand and Warren's hand in the other. You don't have to do this if you're not ready, Warren said quietly. Will it help if I meet him? Her voice was small. I think it will help everyone understand what's best for you. But Serafina, no matter what happens today, nothing changes how I feel about you. You understand that? She nodded, but her grip on his hand tightened. Christopher was waiting in Angela's office, standing by the window, nervous energy radiating from him. When the door opened and he saw Serafina for the first time, his breath caught audibly. She had Caroline's face, the same delicate features, the same serious expression. But her coloring, the albinism that had made Caroline's family reject her, only made her more striking to him. Serafina, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I'm Christopher. He stopped, uncertain how to finish. Serafina pressed closer to Warren, studying this stranger who claimed to be her father. She saw the same pale eyes she saw in the mirror, the genetic connection undeniable. But she felt nothing. No recognition, no bond, just wariness. Angela facilitated carefully. Christopher wanted to meet you and explain some things. Would you like to sit down? They arranged themselves awkwardly. Serafina and Warren on one small couch, Christopher in a chair across from them. Angela sat at her desk, ready to intervene if needed. Christopher leaned forward, his hands clasped together. I don't know what anyone's told you about me. Probably nothing good if they've mentioned me at all. But I want you to know the truth. He took a breath. I loved your mother. I wasn't good enough for her back then, but I loved her. When her family told me she'd lost the baby, I was devastated. I thought I'd lost both of you. Serafina listened, her face unreadable. I didn't know you existed until 3 weeks ago. If I had known, I would have come. I would have fought for you. You have to believe that. Why? Serafina's voice was barely a whisper. Everyone else threw me away. Why would you be different? The question hit Christopher like a physical blow. Because you're my daughter. Because I've spent 5 years becoming someone who could be a good father. And now I have a chance to prove it. But you don't know me. She glanced at Warren. He knows me. He knows I like drawing and that I'm good at organizing tools and that I get scared during thunderstorms. He knows me. Warren squeezed her shoulder gently, proud of her for speaking up, but heartbroken at the situation. Christopher nodded slowly. You're right. I don't know you yet, but I want to. I want to learn everything about you. I want to be there for school plays and homework and, his voice caught, and all the things I've already missed. Angela intervened. This is a lot for everyone. Maybe we should take a break. But Warren spoke up, surprising everyone. Can I talk to Christopher alone for a minute? Angela looked uncertain, but Warren's expression was serious. She nodded and took Serafina to the outer office, leaving the two men alone. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Warren said, "I need to know if this is real. If you're going to fight for custody, win, and then decide it's too hard and disappear. Because if you're going to hurt her, I'd rather fight you now." Christopher met his gaze. "I'm not going anywhere. I know I have no right to ask you to trust me, but I'm not that person anymore. I'm sober. I'm stable. I'm ready. She doesn't know you. She's terrified of being sent away again. I understand that. But she deserves to know her real father." "I'm not her real father," Warren said, the words painful but true. "I know that. But I'm the one who's been here. I'm the one she trusts." Christopher was quiet for a long moment. "I can see that she loves you. I'm not blind. But doesn't she deserve a chance to love me too? To know where she comes from?" Warren had no answer to that, because Christopher was right. Serafina did deserve to know her biological father if he was genuinely trying to be good for her. But the thought of losing her, of watching her be taken by this stranger, "What do we do?" Warren asked, exhausted. "I don't know," Christopher admitted. "But I'm filing for custody. I have to. She's my daughter." The custody case exploded into chaos. Now there were three parties seeking custody. Constance, arguing family connection and resources. Warren, arguing established relationship and love. And Christopher, arguing biological rights and father's privilege. The judge scheduled an emergency conference to sort through the competing claims. Constance, seeing an opportunity, offered Christopher something unexpected. "My attorney and I would like to support your custody claim. Your family, after all. We can provide resources, help you establish yourself here in Pennsylvania, ensure a smooth transition." Christopher was suspicious. "Why would you help me?" "You don't know me, because you're family. And frankly, Mr. Hayes is not. This child should be with blood relatives, even if that relative is someone we're just meeting." It was a strategic alliance. Constance knew that Christopher's biological claim was stronger than hers. If she couldn't have custody herself, better to support the father than let Warren win. Christopher, still adjusting to this new reality, agreed to meet with her attorney. Warren watched the alliance form with growing dread. That evening, Warren and Serafina sat in his apartment, both of them processing the day. Serafina had been quiet since the meeting, turning the mechanical butterfly over and over in her hands. "Do you want to know him?" Warren asked gently. "Your father?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "He seems nice. But so did my grandmother at first sometimes. How do I know he won't change his mind about me?" "You don't," Warren said. "That's the hardest part. You have to choose to trust people even when you're not sure. Do you trust him?" Warren considered the question carefully. "I think he believes what he's saying. I think he genuinely wants to be your father. But I also think wanting something and being able to do it are different things. And I'm scared." He admitted it because she deserved honesty. "I'm scared of losing you." Serafina set down the butterfly and hugged him fiercely. "I don't want to lose you either." They held each other while outside the first real snow of the season began to fall, covering Milldale in white. The hearing was now 2 weeks away, but instead of 2 parties arguing for custody, there would be 3. And the outcome, which had once seemed difficult but possible, now felt completely uncertain. Angela called late that night with more news. DNA results came back. Christopher is definitely her biological father, and Judge Brennan has indicated she's taking father's rights very seriously. "Warren, I need you to prepare for the possibility that even if we make a strong case, biology might win." Christopher, still adjusting to this new reality, agreed to meet with her attorney. Warren watched the alliance form with growing dread. That evening, Warren and Serafina sat in his apartment, both of them processing the day. Serafina had been quiet since the meeting, turning the mechanical butterfly over and over in her hands. "Do you want to know him?" Warren asked gently. "Your father?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "He seems nice, but so did my grandmother at first sometimes. How do I know he won't change his mind about me?" "You don't," Warren said. "That's the hardest part. You have to choose to trust people even when you're not sure. Do you trust him? Warren considered the question carefully. I think he believes what he's saying. I think he genuinely wants to be your father. But I also think wanting something and being able to do it are different things. And I'm scared. He admitted it because she deserved honesty. I'm scared of losing you. Serafina set down the butterfly and hugged him fiercely. I don't want to lose you either. They held each other while outside the first real snow of the season began to fall, covering Milldale in white. The hearing was now 2 weeks away, but instead of 2 parties arguing for custody, there would be 3. And the outcome, which had once seemed difficult but possible, now felt completely uncertain. Angela called late that night with more news. DNA results came back. Christopher is definitely her biological father, and Judge Brennan has indicated she's taking father's rights very seriously. Warren, I need you to prepare for the possibility that even if we make a strong case, biology might win. Warren stood at his window, watching snowfall, and felt the fragile hope he'd built begin to crack. He'd known this was possible from the moment Angela mentioned Christopher's existence. But knowing intellectually and feeling emotionally were different things. He looked at the photograph of Judith and Philip on the shelf. I'm trying, he whispered to their frozen smiles. I'm trying to do right by her. But I don't know if trying is enough. In the guest room, Serafina's room, the little girl lay awake, holding her mechanical butterfly, wondering if transformation was really possible after all, or if some caterpillars were just meant to stay in the dark. The 2 weeks before the hearing passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. Warren met with Angela almost daily, reviewing testimony, gathering character witnesses, strengthening his case. But now it felt like building a sandcastle against an incoming tide. Biology was a powerful argument, and Christopher's rights as a father carried legal weight that Warren's love, no matter how genuine, couldn't match. Christopher, meanwhile, was trying to build a relationship with Serafina through supervised visits at Angela's office. The first few were painfully awkward. He brought gifts, a sketchbook, colored pencils, a book about birds, things the private investigator had told him she might like. Serafina accepted them politely, but kept her distance, answering his questions in monosyllables while her eyes kept drifting to the clock. Do you like drawing? Christopher asked during their 3rd visit. Yes. What do you draw? Birds, mostly. Your mother liked birds, too. She used to... He paused, seeing Serafina's expression brighten slightly. She used to keep a journal of all the different species she saw. Cardinals were her favorite. This caught Serafina's attention. Really? Really? She said they reminded her that even in the middle of winter, there could still be color and life. Christopher pulled out his phone, showed her a photo. This was her journal. I still have it. For the first time, Serafina leaned forward, studying the image of her mother's handwriting, the careful sketches of birds. Could I see it sometime? I brought it with me. It's yours if you want it. He'd been carrying it in his truck, hoping for a moment like this, when Warren picked Serafina up after that visit. She was clutching a worn leather journal, filled with her mother's handwriting and drawings. She showed it to him carefully, reverently. He gave me this. It was my mother's. Warren felt something twist in his chest. Christopher was offering Serafina something Warren never could, a connection to her past, to the mother she'd never known. It was both beautiful and devastating. That's wonderful, Warren said, meaning it despite the ache. Your mother would want you to have it. At home that evening, Serafina pored over the journal while Warren prepared dinner. She traced her mother's handwriting with her finger, studied the bird sketches, and for the first time, she had a tangible piece of the woman who died, bringing her into the world. Warren? She called from the table. Can someone have 2 fathers? He paused in stirring the pasta sauce. What do you mean? Like Christopher is my real father, my blood father. But you've been my father too. The one who takes care of me and teaches me things. Can both be true. Warren came to sit beside her. I think love doesn't follow rules the way we think it should. If you want to have 2 people in your life who care about you like fathers, there's nothing wrong with that. But the court has to choose. They can't say I have 2 fathers. No, Warren admitted. They can't. But no matter what the court says, the way we feel about each other doesn't change. Legal papers don't control that. She nodded, but her eyes were troubled. The night before the hearing, Warren couldn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table with coffee he didn't drink, reviewing everything one more time. The petition with its signatures, Dr. Russo's evaluation, letters from Mrs. Donnelly, old Pete, Sharon and others, attesting to his character. Photographs of Serafina's bedroom, proof that he'd created a real home for her. But against all that stood Christopher's biological connection, his documented sobriety, his stable employment, and his genuine remorse for missing 8 years of his daughter's life. And standing beside Christopher was Constance with her resources and her ruthless attorney, adding weight to his claim. Around midnight, Warren's phone rang. It was Christopher. "I couldn't sleep," Christopher said. "I keep thinking about tomorrow." "Me too." There was a long pause. Then Christopher said, "She loves you. I can see it every time she looks at you. The way she holds your hand, the way she relaxes when you're nearby. I'd have to be blind not to see it." Warren didn't know what to say to that. "But she's my daughter," Christopher continued, his voice rough. "I spent 8 years thinking she was dead. 8 years of grief and guilt. And now I have a chance to be her father, to give her the life she deserves. I can't walk away from that." "I know," Warren said quietly. "If she were mine, if Philip were still here, I'd fight the whole world for him. I understand what you're feeling. Then you understand why I can't back down, even though I can see what it's costing her." "What it's costing you?" "Yeah," Warren said. "I understand." They sat in silence on opposite ends of a phone line. Two men who both loved the same child, both wanting what was best for her, both terrified of losing her. Finally, Christopher said, "Whatever happens tomorrow, she deserves to know she's loved by both of us." Agreed. After they hung up, Warren walked to Serafina's room. She was asleep, the mechanical butterfly on her nightstand, her mother's journal on the pillow beside her. She looked peaceful, unaware that in the morning adults would decide her entire future. Warren pulled the blanket up around her shoulders and whispered, "I'm going to fight for you tomorrow, as hard as I can. But if that's not enough, if you have to go with Christopher, I need you to know you gave me a reason to live again. You reminded me that my heart still works. Whatever happens, that matters." She stirred slightly but didn't wake. Warren stood there for a long moment, memorizing this. Her pale hair spread across the pillow, the rise and fall of her breathing, the trust that let her sleep peacefully, even knowing what tomorrow would bring. Then he went back to his own room and tried, without success, to sleep. Dawn came too quickly. The hearing was set for 9 o'clock. By noon, everything would be decided. By tonight, Serafina might be packing to leave with Christopher, or staying here with Warren, or being sent to Philadelphia with Constance. The only certainty was that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The courthouse was fuller than Warren had expected. Mrs. Donnelly sat in the front row, wearing her Sunday best. Old Pete was there, his diner closed for the morning. Sharon and several other parents from the school filled the benches. Even Timothy had come, sitting beside his mother with a serious expression unusual for an 8-year-old. Serafina sat between Warren and Angela, wearing a simple blue dress that Mrs. Donnelly had helped Warren pick out. She clutched a folded piece of paper in her hands, something she'd written that morning before Warren woke up. He'd found her at the kitchen table, pencil in hand, writing with fierce concentration. "What's that?" he'd asked gently. "A letter," she'd said. "For the judge." Angela said I could give her a letter if I wanted to tell her something myself. Warren hadn't asked to read it. It was Serafina's voice, her choice. Whatever she'd written belonged to her alone. Judge Brennan entered, and everyone rose. The formality of it felt surreal. This wasn't just a legal proceeding. This was a child's life being decided by testimony and evidence and the interpretation of law. Constance's attorney went first as planned. He was efficient and pointed. "Your Honor, we support Mr. Dane's petition for custody. As the biological father, he has rights that supersede all other claims. He's demonstrated stability, sobriety, and genuine commitment to this child. With our support and resources, he can provide an excellent home. He painted Christopher as a reformed man who deserved a second chance, and by extension painted Warren as someone who'd served his purpose but was no longer needed. Mr. Hayes has been kind, certainly, but kindness doesn't override biology and legal rights. Angela stood to present Warren's case. She was measured and clear. Your Honor, Mr. Hayes has provided consistent care for Serafina during a critical period in her development. The transformation in this child has been remarkable. She presented the community petition, the letters of support, and photographs showing Serafina's progression from isolated to engaged. Biology matters, Angela acknowledged. But so does stability. So does the bond that's been formed. Serafina knows Mr. Hayes. She trusts him. Removing her from that relationship to place her with a virtual stranger, however well-intentioned, carries risks we must consider. Christopher testified next. He was nervous but honest, his hands gripping the edge of the witness stand. He spoke about his past with candor, the addiction, the lies he'd believed, the years of thinking his daughter was dead. He spoke about his sobriety, his job, the apartment he'd prepared. I know I missed 8 years, he said, his voice breaking. I can't get those back, but I can be there for the rest of her life. I can give her a father's love, a connection to her mother, a sense of where she comes from. She deserves that. Under cross-examination, Angela was gentle but pointed. Mr. Dane, how many hours total have you spent with Serafina? About 6 in supervised visits. And in that time has she called you Dad or Father? Christopher's jaw tightened. No. Has she expressed a desire to live with you? Not in words. But she's curious about her mother. She's starting to open up. Starting to, Angela repeated. Whereas with Mr. Hayes, she's already opened. Already trusts. Already has a home. Warren's testimony was the emotional center. He spoke quietly but firmly about finding Serafina behind his shop, about teaching her on Saturdays, about watching her transform from a child who believed she was cursed into one who was beginning to understand her worth. I'm not trying to replace her father, Warren said, looking directly at Christopher. I'm trying to be the person she needs right now, the person who's already here, already committed, already loves her. Constance's attorney tried to undermine him. Mr. Hayes, isn't it true that you suffered from severe depression, that you were prescribed antidepressants? Yes. And isn't it true that you're using this child to fill the void left by your own son's death? Warren took a breath. I loved my son. I still love him. Nothing will ever replace him. But loving Serafina isn't about replacing Philip. It's about honoring what he taught me, that love is always worth fighting for. The courtroom was silent. Even Constance's attorney seemed to recognize he couldn't push further without appearing cruel. Then Judge Brennan spoke. I'd like to hear from Serafina herself. Angela stood. Your Honor, Serafina wrote a letter. With your permission, she'd like you to read it. The judge nodded. A bailiff took the folded paper from Serafina's trembling hands and delivered it to the bench. Judge Brennan unfolded it carefully, and the courtroom held its breath. She read silently, her expression revealing nothing. The letter seemed short, just 1 page in a child's careful handwriting. But Judge Brennan read it twice, then set it down and removed her glasses. This is one of the most difficult cases I've handled, she said quietly. Because everyone here, in their own way, wants what's best for this child. She looked at Constance. Ms. Constance, I appreciate family connection. But your involvement with Serafina has been minimal until legal proceedings began. That concerns me. Then to Christopher. Mr. Dane, your rights as a biological father carry significant weight. Your sobriety and stability are commendable. But rights must be balanced with the child's best interests and her emotional well-being. Finally, to Warren. Mr. Hayes, you've shown remarkable character. The bond you've formed with Serafina is evident and genuine. Judge Brennan picked up the letter again. I'm going to read part of what Serafina wrote, because I think everyone needs to hear her voice in this. She began reading aloud, and Serafina's words filled the courtroom. Dear Judge Brennan, my name is Serafina, and I'm 8 years old. For most of my life, people looked at me like I was wrong. My family said I was cursed because of how I look. They said my mother died because of me. I believed them. I thought maybe I was a mistake, something that shouldn't have happened. Then I met Warren. He didn't look at me like I was wrong. He looked at me like I was just a person, just a kid who needed help. He taught me about engines and patience, and that being different isn't the same as being broken. Judge Brennan continued reading, and the courtroom remained utterly silent. I know Christopher is my real father. I know he didn't know about me, and that's not his fault. I don't want to hurt him. He seems nice, and I like hearing about my mother. But Warren is the one who was there when I needed someone. He's the one who made me believe I deserved to be loved. He's the one who taught me that I'm not cursed, just different, and that's okay. I don't know what the right answer is. I just know I don't want to leave the only person who ever made me feel like I belonged somewhere. Please, let me stay with Warren. I promise I'll be good. I promise I won't be any trouble. I just want to stay where I finally feel safe. The judge's voice caught slightly on the final words. She set the letter down and took a moment before continuing. Several people in the gallery were crying quietly. Warren felt his own eyes burning, but refused to let the tears fall. Not yet. Judge Brennan looked at all three parties. "This is a Solomon's choice," she said quietly. "Mr. Dane, your biological rights are significant. The law recognizes that parents have a fundamental right to raise their children. You've demonstrated sobriety, stability, and genuine desire to be a father." Christopher nodded, his expression tense. "However," the judge continued, "this court must also consider the child's best interests, her established relationships, and the trauma that can result from severing bonds that have already formed." She paused. "Miss Constance, your petition for custody is denied. You've shown no meaningful relationship with this child, and your motivations appear to be about control rather than care." Constance's face flushed red, but she said nothing. As for Mr. Dane and Mr. Hayes, Judge Brennan looked between them. "Both of you clearly care for this child. Both of you want what's best for her. The question is, what arrangement serves her needs most effectively?" She picked up several documents, reviewed them briefly. "I'm making the following determination. Mr. Hayes will retain primary physical custody of Serafina during the school year. She will continue living in his home, attending her current school, maintaining her established routine and relationships." Warren felt his heart stop, then restart with painful force. "However," the judge continued, "Mr. Dane is her biological father with legal rights that this court respects. He will be granted regular visitation, starting with supervised visits twice per week, gradually increasing to unsupervised visits, and eventually including overnight stays and extended time during summer breaks." She looked directly at Christopher. "Mr. Dane, I'm giving you the opportunity to build a relationship with your daughter without traumatizing her by immediate removal from the only stable home she's known. If over the next 6 months you demonstrate consistent involvement and Serafina becomes comfortable with you, we will revisit the custody arrangement." Christopher's face showed a mix of disappointment and relief. Not what he'd hoped for, but not a total loss. "In 6 months, Judge Brennan said firmly, we will reconvene. At that time, we'll evaluate whether the current arrangement continues to serve Serafina's best interests or whether modifications are needed. Both of you, Mr. Hayes and Mr. Dane, are expected to cooperate fully, to put Serafina's needs above your own desires, and to facilitate a healthy relationship between this child and both of her father figures." She brought her gavel down. "Court is adjourned." The sound of wood striking wood felt like an earthquake. Warren sat frozen for a moment, unable to process what had just happened. He'd won. Not completely, not permanently, but for now, Serafina could stay. Angela squeezed his shoulder. "You did it." Serafina turned to him, her pale eyes wide. "I can stay." Warren pulled her into his arms, finally letting the tears fall. "You can stay." She clung to him, and he felt her small body shaking with relief. Around them, the gallery erupted in quiet celebration. Mrs. Donnelly was crying openly. Old Pete was wiping his eyes. Sharon hugged Timothy, who looked pleased with himself, as if he'd personally contributed to the victory. Christopher approached slowly, his expression complicated. Warren stood, still holding Serafina's hand. "Congratulations," Christopher said quietly. "It clearly cost him to say it. I'm sorry," Warren replied, meaning it. "I know this isn't what you wanted." "No, it's not." Christopher looked at Serafina. "But the judge is right. You don't know me yet. It wouldn't be fair to just take you away." He crouched down to her level. "I'd still like to see you, to get to know you. Would that be okay?" Serafina looked at Warren, who nodded encouragingly. She turned back to Christopher. "I'd like that. I want to hear more about my mother. I can tell you everything I remember. And I have more things of hers, photos, letters. They're all yours." Christopher stood, extended his hand to Warren. "Thank you for taking care of her when I couldn't." Warren shook his hand. "Thank you for giving her a chance to know her father. It was an uneasy peace, but it was peace nonetheless. Two men who both loved the same child, finding a way to coexist for her sake." Constance left without speaking to anyone, her lawyer following close behind. Her defeat was complete, and the bitterness on her face suggested she wouldn't be returning to Milldale anytime soon. Outside the courthouse, the December sun was bright on fresh snow. Warren lifted Serafina up, and she wrapped her arms around his neck. "I was so scared," she whispered. "Me too," Warren admitted. "But we made it through, for 6 months. Then they decide again. Then we'll make sure those 6 months show everyone that this is where you belong." He set her down, took her hand. "Come on. Pete's having everyone over at the diner to celebrate." The diner was packed with supporters, all of them wanting to congratulate Warren and welcome Serafina. For the first time in her life, she was surrounded by a community that saw her not as cursed or strange, but simply as a child who'd found her way home. Christopher came too, at Warren's invitation. It was awkward at first, but over coffee and pie, he began to integrate into the fabric of Serafina's life. He told stories about Caroline that made Serafina's eyes light up. He showed her more photos on his phone. And slowly, carefully, he began building a bridge to the daughter he'd thought he'd lost. That evening, back at the apartment, Serafina helped Warren make dinner. Spaghetti, her favorite. The mechanical butterfly sat on the kitchen counter, its copper wings catching the lamplight. Her mother's journal was on the table, open to a page with a cardinal sketch. "Warren," Serafina said as she carefully measured pasta, "can someone have 2 fathers?" It was the same question she'd asked before, but this time it came with possibility rather than fear. "Yes," Warren said firmly. "Yes, they can. Love doesn't have limits. It just grows to fit whoever needs it," she smiled, and in that moment, Warren knew they would be okay. All of them. It wouldn't be simple, and there would be adjustments and complications, and another hearing in 6 months. But for now, Serafina was home. And home was exactly where she belonged. 6 months passed like seasons shifting, slowly at first, then suddenly complete. Winter gave way to spring, and Milldale transformed from snow-covered streets to budding trees, and the return of cardinals to Mrs. Donnelly's bird feeder. The re-evaluation hearing arrived on a warm May morning. This time, the courtroom felt different. Less like a battlefield, more like a formality. Angela presented her report with quiet satisfaction. Christopher had been consistent, visiting twice a week without fail. He'd attended Serafina's school play, helped with a science project about bird migration, and had begun teaching her about her mother's family history, the good parts, the stories that gave Serafina roots without the weight of rejection. Serafina herself had blossomed. Her teachers reported dramatic improvements. She had friends now. Real friends who invited her to birthday parties and sat with her at lunch. Timothy had become her best friend, and his mother Sharon had become an unofficial aunt figure, helping Warren navigate the mysteries of raising a daughter. Most importantly, the psychological evaluation showed a child who was thriving, secure, happy, no longer carrying the belief that she was cursed or unwanted. Judge Brennan reviewed everything carefully, then smiled, the first time Warren had seen her smile in court. "It's rare that I see a case resolved this well. Mr. Hayes, you've provided an excellent home. Mr. Dane, you've shown admirable consistency and genuine commitment. And Serafina, you've shown remarkable resilience." She formalized the arrangement permanently. Warren would maintain primary custody during the school year. Christopher would have Serafina for most of the summer and alternating holidays. Both men would share legal decision-making. It was official now, no longer temporary. A family built not on traditional structures, but on love and commitment. 3 weeks later, Serafina turned 9. Warren and Christopher planned the party together, an event that would have seemed impossible 8 months ago. They held it at Warren's shop, the space that had started everything. The garage bay was decorated with streamers and balloons. Mrs. Donnelly brought a cake shaped like a butterfly. Old Pete catered with his famous burgers. Half the town showed up. Christopher gave Serafina a photo album he'd created, filled with pictures of her mother and stories written in his careful handwriting. "So you'll always know her," he said. "So you'll always know where you come from." Serafina hugged him, and this time the gesture was natural, comfortable. "Thank you, Dad," she said, and Christopher's eyes filled with tears at hearing that word from her for the first time. Warren's gift was more modest, but no less meaningful. A larger mechanical sculpture, this one of a phoenix rising from flames, its wings spread wide. "For transformation," he explained. "For rising from ashes and becoming something new." Serafina understood immediately. She placed it on the table next to the butterfly. 2 pieces that told the story of her journey. Later, as the party wound down and the sun set over Milldale, Serafina stood between her 2 fathers, Warren on one side, Christopher on the other, for a photograph. Sharon took the picture, capturing the moment. A girl who'd been rejected by her family, now flanked by 2 men who'd chosen to love her. "Say family," Sharon instructed. They all said it together, and the word felt true. 1 year later, Serafina stood in front of her 5th grade class, presenting a project about families. She'd drawn a picture showing Warren's shop, Christopher's apartment in the house he'd bought in Milldale, and Mrs. Donnelly's library. Lines connected all the places, all the people who'd become her family. "Family doesn't have to look like everyone else's," she told her classmates. Her voice steady and confident, so different from the frightened, silent child she'd been. "Family is the people who show up for you, who see you and don't look away, who love you even when it's complicated." She showed them the mechanical butterfly Warren had made, explained how butterflies transform. "I used to think I was wrong because I looked different. But I'm not wrong. I'm just me, and that's enough." The class applauded, and Timothy gave her a thumbs up from his seat. That evening, Warren cooked dinner while Serafina did homework at the kitchen table. Christopher was coming over. He often did now. The awkwardness long since replaced by genuine friendship between the 2 men. They discovered they both liked baseball, both preferred coffee black, both loved Serafina more than anything. The doorbell rang, and Serafina ran to answer it. Christopher came in carrying Chinese takeout. He'd learned that Warren couldn't cook everything, and had started supplementing with takeout on his visit nights. They ate together, the 3 of them, talking about Serafina's day, about Christopher's construction project, about the car Warren was restoring. It was ordinary, domestic, normal, everything Serafina had never had before and had desperately needed. After dinner, Christopher pulled out his guitar, another surprise talent, and played while Serafina drew at the table. Warren cleaned up, listening to music and watching this strange, beautiful family they'd created. Later, after Christopher left and Serafina was getting ready for bed, she came to find Warren. "Can I ask you something?" "Always. Do you think your son and my mother are happy we found each other?" Warren had thought about this often, especially late at night when the apartment was quiet. "Yes," he said with certainty. "I think they'd be very happy. I think maybe they had something to do with it, like they brought us together." "Something like that." Serafina hugged him goodnight, then went to her room, her real room, with her drawings on the walls and her mechanical butterfly on the dresser and her mother's journal on the nightstand. Safe, loved, home. Warren stood in the doorway watching her settle in. This child who'd saved him as much as he'd saved her. She'd given him a reason to keep living when he'd forgotten why life mattered. She'd reminded him that his heart, broken as it was, still worked, still had room for love. "Good night, sweetheart," he said softly. "Good night, Dad," she replied, and the word still made his heart catch every time. He turned off the light and walked to his own room, past the photographs of Judith and Philip that still held places of honor, but no longer held only grief. Now they held gratitude too, for the love they'd given him, for the lessons they'd taught him, for leading him somehow to a little girl who needed him as much as he'd needed her. Outside, spring night settled over Milldale. Cardinals nested in the trees. The shop signs swayed gently in the breeze. And inside the apartment above Hayes Auto Repair, a family slept peacefully, a family built not on blood or law, but on the radical, transformative power of choosing to love someone who needed it most. The mechanical butterfly caught moonlight through the window, its copper wings gleaming, frozen mid-flight, but somehow still suggesting movement, possibility, transformation, and that was exactly what they'd all found. Transformation. From grief to hope, from isolation to belonging, from curse to blessing. Sometimes, Warren thought as sleep finally claimed him, the family we choose chooses us right back. And that makes all the difference.